Story 1. The Hitchhiker's Glare. It was a desolate stretch of highway, bordered by dense forests and shrouded in thick fog. Sarah had been driving for hours, her eyes growing weary as the dim headlights cut through the mist. Her GPS had lost signal miles ago, and she hadn't seen another car in what felt like ages. With the eerie stillness pressing in, she began to regret taking the back roads. The isolation felt suffocating, and an unsettling feeling started gnawing at her gut. Just as she considered pulling over to rest, she noticed a figure standing on the side of the road. A man, tall, lanky, wearing a tattered jacket and holding out his thumb. Sarah's first instinct was to drive past him. There was something off about him, something she couldn't quite put her finger on. But as she neared him, her car seemed to lose power. The engine sputtered, and the dashboard lights flickered. Panicked, she pulled to the side of the road, hoping to restart the car before the man reached her. But it was too late. He was already walking toward her window, his face obscured by the fog and the dim light. Sarah locked the doors and tried the ignition again, but the car wouldn't respond. Tap, tap, tap. The man knocked on her window, his face now clear, a gaunt, sunken visage with hollow eyes. Sarah's heart raced. She rolled the window down just a crack, her voice trembling. "I'm sorry. My car's broken down. I can't help you." The man said nothing, his eyes boring into hers. The silence stretched on, thick with tension. Suddenly his lips curled into a twisted smile. "You think I'm the one who needs help?" he whispered, his voice low and menacing. "I've been waiting for you." Sarah's blood ran cold. She fumbled for her phone, but there was no signal. The man's grin widened, and he began to circle the car, dragging his fingers across the windows, his nails scratching the glass with a spine-chilling screech. Terrified, she pressed the ignition one last time. The car roared to life. Without hesitation, Sarah floored the gas pedal, speeding down the road. In the rearview mirror, the man stood motionless in the middle of the highway, his eyes glowing unnaturally in the red glow of her taillights. And then, as quickly as he had appeared, he vanished into the fog. She didn't stop driving until she reached the nearest town. Later, when she recounted the story at a diner, an old man at the counter gave her a knowing look. "You're lucky," he said. "They say a hitchhiker roams that highway. If you pick him up, you disappear. Forever." Sarah shivered, her mind replaying the man's haunting words. "I've been waiting for you." Story 2. The Phantom Lights. Tom was used to late-night drives. As a truck driver, he had spent countless hours navigating empty highways under the cover of darkness. But there was something different about this night. The road stretched out endlessly before him, illuminated only by the faint glow of his headlights. He had been warned about this particular stretch of road. The locals called it Dead Man's Pass. Supposedly there had been a series of accidents here years ago, and the victims' spirits were said to linger. Tom didn't believe in ghosts, but as the night wore on, an uneasy feeling settled in his chest. The trees lining the road seemed to close in on him, and the air grew heavy with tension. He turned up the radio to drown out the creeping sense of dread. Then he saw them, a pair of headlights in the distance, coming toward him. Relieved to see another vehicle, Tom relaxed slightly. But as the lights drew nearer, he noticed something strange. The other car wasn't getting any closer. It seemed to hover just out of reach, its lights flickering eerily in the darkness. Confused, Tom flashed his high beams, signaling the other driver. The lights didn't respond. Instead, they began to weave erratically, darting from side to side as if the driver had lost control. Tom slowed down, wary of a potential accident, but the lights continued their erratic dance. His heart pounded as the headlights suddenly vanished, plunging the road back into darkness. For a moment, Tom thought it was over, but then the lights reappeared, this time right behind him. They followed closely, illuminating the back of his truck with an unnatural brightness. Tom glanced in his rearview mirror, but there was no car, no driver, just the blinding lights. Panic surged through him. He pressed down on the gas, his truck roaring as he sped down the highway. But no matter how fast he drove, the lights stayed on his tail, unrelenting and menacing. Tom's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he swerved onto a side road, hoping to lose the phantom lights. For a brief moment, it worked. The lights disappeared, leaving him alone in the night. But just as relief began to wash over him, they reappeared, this time directly in front of him, blinding him with their brightness. Tom slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The lights engulfed him, and his truck skidded off the road, crashing into the trees. When Tom awoke, he was in the hospital. The police told him they had found his truck wrapped around a tree on Dead Man's Pass. There was no other vehicle in sight, no tire marks from the headlights that had chased him. But Tom knew what he had seen. The phantom lights were real, and they had nearly claimed him as their next victim. Story 3. The Woman in White. Ben had always been a skeptic. Ghost stories, urban legends, they were all nonsense to him. So when his friends dared him to drive down Raven's Hollow, a road infamous for ghost sightings, he scoffed and accepted the challenge. It was well past midnight when he set out. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the twisted, narrow road. Raven's Hollow was known for its sharp turns and steep cliffs, but Ben wasn't worried. He was a good driver, and besides, he didn't believe in any of the paranormal nonsense surrounding the place. As he drove, he couldn't help but recall the stories his friends had told him. The most famous tale was of a woman in white, a bride who had died in a car accident on her wedding night. She was said to appear to drivers, begging for help before vanishing into thin air. Ben chuckled to himself, shaking his head at the absurdity of it all. But as he rounded a bend, his headlights caught something, a figure standing in the middle of the road. He slammed on the brakes, heart racing. The figure was a woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, her long dark hair hanging over her face. For a moment, Ben froze. He could see the woman clearly now, her pale skin glowing eerily in the moonlight. She seemed to be staring straight at him, though her eyes were hidden by her hair. Ben's skepticism wavered. He considered backing up and turning around, but something compelled him to stay. He rolled down the window, his voice shaky. "Are you okay?" The woman didn't answer. Instead, she took a slow, deliberate step toward the car. Ben's pulse quickened. "Do you need help?" he asked again, louder this time. Still, she remained silent, her movements slow and unnatural. Another step, and another. Suddenly, she lifted her head, revealing hollow, empty sockets where her eyes should have been. A scream tore from Ben's throat as he slammed the car into reverse, the tires screeching as he sped backward down the road. He didn't stop until he reached the main highway, his hands trembling on the wheel. He never spoke about the encounter again, but every time he passed by the entrance to Raven's Hollow, he couldn't shake the feeling that the woman in white was still there, waiting for the next driver to cross her path. Story 1. The Visitor in the Storm. It was a late summer evening when the sky darkened ominously over the quiet town of Maplewood. Emma, a 25-year-old teacher, had always loved thunderstorms. She found the sound of rain soothing and the flashes of lightning exciting. As the first rumble of thunder echoed through the sky, Emma grabbed her cup of tea and settled into the cozy corner of her living room. The storm was just beginning to pick up, and she anticipated a relaxing evening indoors. But something was off. The storm felt different, angrier. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows, and the rain came down in torrents, making it hard to see more than a few feet outside. Emma sipped her tea and stared out the window, watching the lightning illuminate the street in quick, jagged bursts. As the storm intensified, she noticed something unusual, a figure standing in the middle of the road. At first, she thought it might be a neighbor caught in the downpour, but there was something unnatural about the way the figure just stood there, unmoving, despite the wind and rain battering against it. Lightning struck again, and Emma saw the figure more clearly. It wasn't just standing there, it was staring directly at her. Heart-pounding, Emma quickly drew the curtains and backed away from the window. "It's just a trick of the light," she told herself, trying to rationalize the unsettling sight. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the image of that figure from her mind. A loud knock on the front door snapped her out of her thoughts. Her blood ran cold. Who would be out in this storm, let alone knocking on her door? The storm raged on, yet the knocking continued, slow and deliberate. Emma's heart raced as she approached the door. She hesitated, her hand hovering over the doorknob. Another flash of lightning lit up the room, and in the brief illumination, she caught sight of a shadow moving outside the door's frosted glass. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door just a crack. "Hello?" she called out, her voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. No answer. Emma opened the door a little wider, peering into the rain-soaked night. No one was there. Only the dark, empty street greeted her. She quickly shut the door and locked it, her hands shaking. She double-checked all the windows and doors, making sure everything was secure. As she made her way back to the living room, the power suddenly went out, plunging her house into darkness. In the silence that followed, she heard it, a faint whisper, so soft she almost didn't catch it. "Let me in." Emma froze. The whisper came again, this time louder, more insistent. "Let me in." Her eyes darted around the room, trying to locate the source of the voice, but there was nothing, just the sound of the storm and the relentless whispering. The knocking started again, louder this time, echoing through the house. The whisper followed, growing more distorted with each repetition. "Let me in! Let me in!" Emma's pulse quickened. She grabbed her phone to call for help, but the signal was dead. Desperate, she retreated to her bedroom and locked the door. The knocking and whispers continued, now seeming to come from all around her. And then the voice changed. It was no longer a whisper, but a low growl, guttural and menacing. "I'm already inside." Emma's heart stopped. She turned slowly, her eyes scanning the room. And there, in the corner, illuminated by a sudden flash of lightning, was the figure. The same figure she had seen on the street. Its face was pale, its eyes hollow and black. It grinned, and the lights went out. Story 2. The Warning. In the small town of Hollow Creek, thunderstorms were not unusual, but this one felt different. Alan, a 35-year-old mechanic, had been working late at his garage when the storm rolled in. He was used to bad weather, but the storm that night was vicious, with winds howling like banshees and rain slashing at the windows with a ferocity he'd never seen before. As the storm grew worse, Alan decided to call it a night and head home. He locked up the garage, zipped up his jacket, and dashed through the downpour to his truck. Just as he was about to start the engine, a flash of lightning illuminated something in the distance. A woman was standing in the middle of the road, soaked to the bone, her face hidden beneath a mess of wet hair. Startled, Alan honked his horn, thinking she hadn't seen him, but the woman didn't move. She just stood there, unmoving, her head slightly tilted as if she was watching him. Concerned, Alan rolled down the window and called out, "Ma'am, do you need help?" No response. The woman remained still, her head slowly tilting further to the side. Alan felt a chill crawl up his spine. Something wasn't right. He considered driving away, but his conscience wouldn't let him leave her there. He opened the truck door and stepped out into the rain. "Are you okay?" he shouted over the roar of the storm. The woman didn't move. Cautiously, Alan approached her, but as he got closer, he realized something was terribly wrong. The woman's clothes were torn and soaked with mud, and her skin was unnaturally pale, almost translucent. Her eyes, when she finally looked up at him, were black voids. Without warning, the woman grabbed Alan's arm with icy cold hands. "You need to leave," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. Alan stumbled back, terrified. "What? What are you talking about?" The woman's grip tightened, her black eyes staring into his. "He's coming." Before Alan could respond, the woman disappeared. One moment she was there, and the next, she was gone, swallowed by the storm as if she had never existed. Alan rushed back to his truck, his heart racing. He fumbled with the keys, finally starting the engine, and sped down the road, glancing in the rearview mirror every few seconds, expecting to see the woman again, but she was gone. As he neared his house, a sudden sense of dread washed over him. The storm had intensified, and something about the night felt wrong, like a heavy, oppressive presence hung in the air. When he pulled into his driveway, Alan was relieved to see his house still standing, but the feeling of unease wouldn't leave him. He hurried inside, locking the door behind him, and tried to shake off the encounter. That's when he heard it, a soft, rhythmic knocking at the front door. Alan's blood ran cold. He hadn't seen anyone on the porch, and his street was deserted. His hand hovered over the doorknob, heart pounding in his chest. Slowly, he opened the door. No one was there, but etched into the wood of the door, scratched deep into the surface, were the words, "He's here." Story 3. The Ghost in the Rain. Megan, a 22-year-old college student, had always hated thunderstorms. The constant flashes of lightning and booming thunder made her anxious, and she could never shake the feeling that something was watching her when the weather turned foul. On this particular night, the storm was especially bad. The sky had been dark for hours, and the rain was coming down in thick sheets, making it impossible to see outside. She was alone in her apartment, her roommate having gone out of town for the weekend. Megan had tried to distract herself with a movie, but the storm's intensity kept pulling her attention away. Every crash of thunder made her jump, and the flickering lights only added to her growing sense of dread. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, expecting a text from a friend, but instead saw a notification from her security camera app. The camera, which was set up to monitor the front door of her apartment, had detected movement. Frowning, Megan opened the app and checked the live feed. At first, she didn't see anything unusual, just the front porch drenched in rain. But then, in a flash of lightning, she saw it. Someone standing just beyond the reach of the camera's light, half hidden in the shadows. Megan's heart raced. Who would be out in this storm? She watched the screen, waiting for the figure to move, but it remained still. Lightning flashed again, and this time, Megan saw it more clearly. The figure was a woman, drenched from head to toe, her face turned toward the camera, but obscured by long, dark hair. Panic set in. Megan ran to the front door and locked it, checking the windows to make sure they were secure. She called out, "Who's there?" But there was no response, only the relentless pounding of the rain. Suddenly, the lights flickered and went out, plunging the apartment into darkness. Megan grabbed her phone, the only source of light, and checked the camera feed again. The woman was gone. But as Megan lowered her phone, she saw something that made her blood run cold, a set of wet footprints leading from the front door, across the living room, and stopping just outside her bedroom door. And then she heard the door slowly creak open. Story 1. The Wrong Order. Emily was having one of those weeks where everything seemed to go wrong. She had lost her job, her boyfriend had just left her, and her apartment felt emptier than ever. As she slumped on her couch, her stomach growled, reminding her that she hadn't eaten all day. The thought of cooking was overwhelming, so she decided to order food. She opened the delivery app on her phone and scanned through the options until she landed on a local Thai restaurant. After choosing a few of her favorites, she clicked Order. The estimated delivery time was 30 minutes, which felt like an eternity, but she was too hungry to care. While she waited, Emily turned on her favorite show and tried to distract herself from her chaotic life. 30 minutes passed, then 40. Just as she began to think about canceling her order, a knock on the door jolted her. She rushed to the door, her stomach grumbling with anticipation. When she opened it, she was greeted by a delivery man with a strange look on his face. His eyes darted around her apartment, taking in the empty bottles scattered across the floor and the dim light that barely illuminated the cramped space. Hi, here's your order," he said, handing her a large bag. "Thanks," Emily replied, taking the bag without really looking at him. She was too focused on the tantalizing aroma wafting from the bag. As she set the food on her kitchen table and began to unpack it, she noticed something odd. Instead of her usual curry and spring rolls, there was an assortment of bizarre items: a raw steak, a can of pickled vegetables, and a strange-looking sauce in a small container. Confused, she glanced back at the delivery man, who was still standing in the doorway. I think there's been a mistake. This isn't my order," she said, her voice shaky. "No mistake," he replied, his tone suddenly ominous. "Just enjoy it. It's all fresh." Before Emily could respond, he turned and walked away, leaving her with a sinking feeling in her stomach. She stared at the food, her appetite suddenly evaporating. Something felt off, but the hunger clawed at her, urging her to at least take a bite. She hesitantly picked up the raw steak, eyeing it with suspicion. As she turned it over, she noticed a faint, dark mark on the bottom, almost like a handprint. Panicking, she dropped the steak as if it burned her. What kind of restaurant would send something like this? She grabbed her phone, intending to call the restaurant, but then she heard a sound. A faint scratching coming from her front door. Frozen in place, she listened closely. The scratching intensified and her heart raced. Was someone trying to get in? She peered through the peephole, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the power flickered and went out, plunging her into darkness. Panic surged through her as she fumbled for her phone. The light from the screen barely illuminated the room, but it was enough to see the outline of something moving outside her window. Then came the knock again, louder this time. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to see who it was. Gathering her courage, she approached the door, her heart pounding in her chest. Peering through the peephole again, she saw the delivery man standing there, a twisted smile spreading across his face. He raised a hand and began to scratch at the door, just like the sound she heard moments before. Fear coursed through her as she stumbled back, realizing the raw steak was no mistake. It was a warning. This man wasn't just delivering food, he was delivering something much darker. She quickly dialed 911, but the call failed. In a last-ditch effort, she rushed to the kitchen and grabbed a knife, gripping it tightly in her trembling hands. As she turned back toward the door, she heard a loud crash from the kitchen. The delivery man had broken in through her back window, glass raining down like deadly confetti. Emily screamed and bolted for the only escape. The bathroom. She slammed the door shut and locked it, pressing her back against it as her heart raced. A moment later, she heard footsteps approaching. The door rattled, and the delivery man's voice came from the other side. "You can't hide forever. I just wanted to share a meal with you." The shadows of his figure danced beneath the door, and Emily's breath quickened. She knew she couldn't stay there forever. Summoning every ounce of courage, she prepared to fight back. Just as the door began to buckle under his weight, she lunged forward, knife raised, ready to confront whatever horror awaited her. Story 2. The midnight snack Jack was an avid night owl, often prowling through his small apartment in search of snacks while the rest of the world slept. One particularly restless night, he decided to order food, knowing that the local diner had 24-hour delivery. He craved a greasy burger and fries, something hearty enough to satisfy his late-night hunger. After placing his order, he settled down on the couch with a movie. Time ticked by slowly, and he lost himself in the film, the flickering screen casting shadows around the room. When the doorbell rang, Jack jumped, glancing at the clock. It was almost 2 a.m. He opened the door to find an elderly woman standing there, her hair a frizzy halo around her head, her clothes tattered and stained. She held a bag with the diner's logo. "Your food, dear," she said, her voice raspy and hoarse. Thanks," Jack replied, taking the bag hesitantly. "But I thought the delivery guy was coming." "Oh, he's busy," she said with a strange smile, her eyes gleaming in the dim light. "I'm just helping out. You won't mind, will you?" Jack shrugged it off, too hungry to care. He thanked her again and shut the door, already pulling out the burger and fries. But as he took his first bite, he noticed something strange. There was a faint metallic taste in the meat, almost like iron. Shrugging it off, he continued to eat, but the odd taste lingered in his mouth. He grabbed a handful of fries to wash it down, but with each bite, the nagging sensation in his gut grew. He took another look at the bag, noticing it felt unusually heavy. Curiosity piqued, he rummaged through it, discovering an envelope stuffed with crumpled bills. As he pulled it out, something fell to the floor, a small blood-stained object that looked disturbingly like a finger. Jack's heart raced. Had the diner sent him human remains? The realization hit him like a cold wave of fear. He bolted to the bathroom, nearly tripping over himself as he ran. He turned on the light, and as he stood there trying to collect his thoughts, he heard the front door creak open. "Jack? Are you in there?" The elderly woman's voice called from the living room, dripping with a sickly sweet tone. "I forgot to tell you the food is a family recipe. You're going to love it. Panic washed over him as he scrambled for his phone. He needed to call the police, but as he reached for it, the bathroom door swung open. The old woman stood there, her expression twisted in glee. Don't you want to try it, Jack? It's so much better fresh. He backed away, his mind racing. What did you put in that food? Oh, just a little secret ingredient, she said, advancing slowly. It makes it taste divine. But you have to keep it in the family, you see. With every word, she stepped closer, her eyes wild with excitement. Jack felt his back hit the wall, and in a moment of desperation, he lunged for the small window above the sink, flinging it open. Get away from me, he shouted as he clambered out, not bothering to look back. He hit the ground hard, pain shooting through his body, but he scrambled to his feet and ran. He dashed down the street, not stopping until he reached the nearest gas station. Panting and sweating, he burst through the door, his heart racing. Call the police, there's a woman, she's... But as he glanced back toward the diner, he saw her silhouette standing in the doorway, watching him with a smile that sent chills down his spine. Jack never returned home that night, but he'd learned a hard lesson about late-night cravings and the price of indulging in a midnight snack. Story 3. The Special Delivery. Maya was a college student with a tight budget, living off instant noodles and occasional pizza. One evening, she received a flyer for a new food delivery service called Culinary Delights. The menu boasted gourmet meals at reasonable prices, and after a long week of studying, she decided to treat herself. With excitement, she browsed the menu and settled on a beautifully plated seafood pasta. It seemed extravagant, but the thought of a real meal made her heart flutter with anticipation. She placed the order and sat back to wait, her stomach growling in delight. An hour later, the doorbell rang, and she hopped up, ready to devour her meal. When she opened the door, a tall man in a crisp uniform stood there, holding a black bag. Your order, miss, he said, a wide smile on his face that felt almost too cheerful. Thanks, Maya replied, taking the bag and glancing inside. The aroma wafting from it was heavenly. As she closed the door, she pulled out the pasta, marveling at its presentation. It looked gourmet, far beyond what she had expected. She dug in, savoring each bite. But after a few minutes, she noticed a strange texture in the sauce. Curious, she examined it more closely and felt a wave of nausea wash over her. Floating in the sauce were small, dark pieces that resembled... Is that hair? She whispered, recoiling in horror. Her stomach turned, and she dropped the fork, the meal forgotten. Panic surged through her as she wondered who had prepared this meal. Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a message from the delivery service. How's your meal? We take great pride in our culinary creations. She felt a chill run down her spine. She quickly searched the name of the service online, but there was nothing. No reviews, no contact information, nothing. Fearing she had stumbled into something dangerous, she decided to call the police, but as she reached for her phone, she heard another knock at the door. Delivery! The man called from outside, his voice cheerful yet eerie. Maya felt frozen, panic coursing through her. She peered through the peephole, and there he was again, standing there with the same unsettling grin. Everything okay, miss? Did you enjoy your meal? With her heart racing, she took a step back, considering her options. She could call for help, but what if he was dangerous? What if he had come to deliver something far worse than food? Suddenly, she heard a scraping sound coming from the back of her apartment. The front door rattled as the delivery man knocked again, this time more forcefully. Maya, let me in. I just want to make sure you're satisfied. In a panic, she grabbed her phone and dashed to the bathroom, locking the door behind her. She dialed 911, her hands shaking. Please, someone's trying to get in. I think it's a delivery guy. I don't know what he wants. The operator assured her that help was on the way, but as she crouched in the bathroom, she heard the sound of breaking glass. Maya, you shouldn't hide from your food. She gasped as the realization hit her. He wasn't just a delivery man. He was something far more sinister. The sound of footsteps approached the bathroom door, and she felt her heart race. I'm calling the police. Stay away from me, she shouted, her voice trembling. The door rattled, and the man's voice turned icy. You don't need the police, just let me in and we can enjoy a meal together. I promise it's fresh. With a surge of adrenaline, Maya grabbed a heavy hairdryer from the counter, ready to defend herself. Just as the door began to buckle under his weight, she hurled the hairdryer at it, hoping to buy herself some time. The door slammed open, and there he stood, grinning wider than ever. Dinner time! In that moment, Maya knew she had to fight. She charged at him, wielding the hairdryer like a weapon. But as she swung, he caught her wrist with an iron grip. Maya, let's not be rude. You'll love what I have in store for you. With horror in her eyes, she realized the true nature of his delivery. It wasn't just a meal, it was a trap. In that instant, she knew that her appetite for something as simple as dinner had led her to a night of terror she would never forget.